both things can be true. The Browns are a terrible organization. They've been a terrible organization. They ultimately had to trade Myles Garrett because of so many mistakes they've made, right? You shouldn't be in a position where you have to trade maybe the greatest player in the history of your franchise, certainly the best defensive player in the history of your franchise, certainly one of the best defensive players in the history of the league.
Myles Garrett is always going to be a person who you're not going to be able to replace. It's just not. I think if you want to approach it that we replaced him and we got enough for him, you're never going to get enough for a franchise player and a person that means that much to your organization.
The Browns did not just trade a star player. They traded the one player their fan base could point to and say, at least we have him. That is what makes this move feel bigger than a normal blockbuster. Myles Garrett was not just another name on the roster. He was the face of the franchise, the defensive heartbeat, the one guaranteed elite thing in Cleveland for years. And now he is in Los Angeles, playing for the Rams, chasing a Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay. That is why this trade hit so hard. The Browns sent Myles Garrett to the Los Angeles Rams in exchange for defensive end Jared Verse, a 2027 first-round pick, a 2028 second-round pick, and a 2029 third-round pick. On paper, that is a strong package. You get a young defensive end, you get future draft capital, and you give yourself a chance to reset the roster. But football is not played on paper, and Browns fans are not reacting to a spreadsheet. They are reacting to losing a Hall of Fame level player who gave them elite production through years of disappointment. The big question now is simple. Did Cleveland make the right decision, or did they just repeat the same mistake that has haunted this franchise for decades? Because when you trade a player like Myles Garrett, there is no easy middle ground. Either you use those assets to rebuild the team the right way, find a quarterback, and finally create a real winning foundation, or you become the team that handed a generational player to the Rams and watched him lift a trophy somewhere else. That is the fear sitting underneath this entire conversation.
And the Rams are now playing with something called the RCP-90, which was a terrifying device. The thing is, though, they got the RCP-90 and Garrett. The rest of the roster is already incredible. They could win the Super Bowl next year, probably will be the favorite, and they never even added Myles Garrett.
The emotional side says the Browns should have never done it. You do not trade the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. You do not trade a player who has been one of the best pass rushers in football for nearly a decade. You do not trade the guy who stayed through losing seasons, quarterback chaos, coaching changes, organizational confusion, and still gave you elite performances. For Browns fans, Garrett was not just talent. He was proof that this franchise could still have something special, even when the rest of the team was falling apart. But the practical side tells a different story. If Myles Garrett no longer believed in the direction of the Browns, then Cleveland had a real problem. If he wanted a chance to compete for championships now, and he did not believe that chance existed in Cleveland, then keeping him would have only delayed the inevitable. You can force a player to stay on a roster, but you cannot force him to believe in the plan. And once a franchise cornerstone checks out mentally, emotionally, or competitively, the organization has to decide whether pride is more important than value. That is where this move becomes complicated. The Browns did not trade Garrett because he was declining. They did not trade him because he was replaceable. They traded him because the bigger picture around the team had changed. The roster was not close enough. The quarterback situation was not stable enough. The future was not clear enough. And when a player like Garrett looks around and sees more questions than answers, it's not hard to understand why he would want to be somewhere that gives him a real shot at a ring.
You should never be in a position to trade that. But that's where they were at.
Yep.
Because he's 30, going 31 this season, and they're not good. They're not. They're not a Super Bowl contender. In my opinion, they're not a playoff contender. They're certainly not a Super Bowl contender. And so they were in this position.
Here's the part nobody is talking about. This trade is really the fallout from Cleveland missing on its biggest gamble. When the Browns made the Deshaun Watson move, they were not trying to rebuild slowly. They were trying to open a championship window. They gave up major draft capital, handed out a massive contract, and believed they had found the quarterback who could take a talented roster over the top. But when that move failed to deliver, everything around it started to collapse. Myles Garrett being traded is not just a Myles Garrett story. It is the collateral damage of a franchise-altering swing that missed. That is why some people are saying this was a take-your-medicine moment for Cleveland. Nobody likes it, nobody wants to see a Hall of Fame player leave, but if the Browns are honest with themselves, they might know this team was not one pass rusher away from winning the AFC. They might know the quarterback room does not inspire enough confidence. They might know that keeping Garrett just to win 6, 7, or 8 games would be wasting the final prime years of one of the greatest defensive players of this era. And if that is the case, trading him becomes painful but logical. The quarterback conversation is really the center of this whole thing, because if Cleveland truly believed it had the quarterback answer on the roster, would it have traded Garrett? Probably not. If the Browns believed Deshaun Watson was about to bounce back and lead a contender, Garrett would still be there. If they believed Shedeur Sanders was ready to become the franchise quarterback right away, they could have linked him with Garrett and sold the fan base on a new window. But by making this trade, Cleveland basically admitted the timeline had shifted.
Think about that. 5 sacks, and you still got blown out of the game. He set the single-season sack record, and the Cleveland Browns were 5-12. He just, at the end of the day, he made no impact as far as winning football games. And that has nothing to do with Myles Garrett. It has more to do with where Cleveland as an organization is in their timeline.
That is why this move sends such a loud message. It says the Browns are not fully convinced they're ready to win big right now. They can talk about competing. They can talk about developing young players. They can talk about building around the next group. But when you move the best non-quarterback on your team, you are telling everyone that the reset is real. You are telling the league that the priority is no longer squeezing out one more season with Garrett. The priority is building a future roster with more flexibility, more picks, and hopefully a real answer at quarterback. But this is where the anger from Browns fans makes sense. Cleveland fans have seen this story before. They watched Joe Thomas become a Hall of Famer and win almost nothing with the organization. They watched Nick Chubb become one of the most respected players in the league and still not get the team to the highest level. They watched Myles Garrett become a Defensive Player of the Year and the best player on the roster, only to see him traded away before the Browns ever truly built a consistent winner around him. At some point, fans stop blaming the players and start blaming the franchise. That is the painful legacy angle here. The Browns have had elite talent walk through the building. This is not a team that has never had great players. The problem is that too many of those great players have had their prime years wasted. Joe Thomas gave Cleveland everything and had very little team success to show for it. Nick Chubb gave the team heart, toughness, and credibility. Myles Garrett gave the Browns national respect on defense. But what did the organization actually turn that into? One playoff win is not enough, not for that level of talent.
You know, I seen Myles Garrett now, become the best non-quarterback in the NFL. Where have the Browns won with them? This organization, I just hope and pray for the sake of my fandom and everybody else who loves this team can just learn how to get out their own way, learn from previous mistakes.
Trading Garrett cannot just be defended by saying they got picks. Picks are only valuable if you use them correctly. Draft capital does not automatically fix a franchise. The Browns did not just trade Garrett for assets, they traded him for the responsibility to finally get the next phase right. That is a very different kind of pressure. And the Rams side of this trade makes that pressure even louder. Los Angeles already had Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay, and a roster being discussed as a Super Bowl threat. Then they added Myles Garrett. That is not a team hoping to be relevant. That is a team attacking a championship window with everything they have. The nightmare scenario for Cleveland is simple. Imagine Garrett wrecking games in prime time while the Browns are still searching for answers. Imagine him winning in January while Cleveland fans watch another rebuild unfold. That would not just hurt emotionally, it would become another chapter in the long story of Cleveland having greatness in the building and failing to build around it. Here's the part nobody is talking about. Browns fans are not angry because they do not understand the football logic. They are angry because they have heard future-based promises before. They have been told to wait, to trust the plan, to be patient, and too often patience in Cleveland has turned into another reset with no real direction. This is where it gets dangerous. Once you trade Myles Garrett, the illusion is gone. The Browns have to be honest about where they are. If they believe in Shedeur Sanders, and play him and find out. Do not waste time with half measures. Do not pretend the team is both rebuilding and contending at the same time. That kind of confusion is exactly what has held this franchise back for years. So, did the Browns make the right decision? The honest answer is they may have made the right move for the situation they created, but that does not mean they deserve credit for creating the situation. If a franchise reaches the point where it has to trade a Hall of Fame level player in his prime because the rest of the plan fell apart, that is not a victory. And if the Rams win big while Cleveland is still searching for answers, this trade will not be remembered as smart business. It will be remembered as the day the Browns lost their best player because they never gave him a real reason to stay.